as God made me, I have no desire for a mouth at my breast or a pot on the fire. I heed the high voice as I go where I'm sent, to mow down the men who refuse to repent.
So, after thousands of years in which very little of recorded history exists, we finally come to a moment in time that I can actually talk about. The age of apostasy. Now, this is going to take a little bit of explaining, so I suggest you grab a drink as I personally open up this bottle of 19 Crimes. And, well, let me get deep into the lore. Well, first of all, we are going to have to talk about the rise of the ecclesiarchy, and that is the imperial church. Now, for those of you who might remember my discussion about the Great Crusade and how the emperor had effectively tried to ban religion, this might seem a little bit odd, but essentially, as the Great Crusade had continued onwards and the emperor had attempted to suppress all worship of religion, there had been a growth of what you might call an imperial cult, starting with Lorgar and his Laetitio Divinitatis. Essentially, more and more people began to view the emperor himself as a living god, one who would lead them into a new age of prosperity. This was doubled with the appearance of the first saints, one of them being one of the remembrances who had escaped alongside Nathaniel Garrow following Istvan III. Following the end of the heresy, this cult had essentially grown in power and influence, and without the emperor or many of his primarchs to suppress it, it essentially evolved into a state religion, one in which worship of the emperor was effectively mandatory. Now, how one chose to worship the emperor was completely up to the person in question, provided they didn't go too far or too extreme. It was essentially more taking local religions and reworking them into the worship of the emperor. For instance, a planet of primitives who worship the sun and who sacrifice people on a bonfire to bring the sun around every year. Well, the sun is actually a great person known as the emperor, and so long as you keep your human sacrifice limited to just one person a year, you don't go too far, you don't get too extreme, you don't start, massacring thousands and hacking out their hearts and eating them, the church really doesn't care. You are free to worship as you see fit, depending on your planet's unique culture, of course. This eventually led to the cult of the emperor becoming the official religion of imperial space. Every single person within imperial space became a fervent worshipper of the emperor in some shape, form, or description, and they combined together into what became known as the ecclesiarchy, the official, what would be the right word? I suppose the best way to describe it would be the official ruling body of the imperial state religion. And over time, this ecclesiarchy grew in power and influence, eventually reaching something of a peak during the Nova Terra Internegram, where the ecclesiarchy proved instrumental in bringing Segmentum Pacificus back into the fold. However, as time went on, the ecclesiarchy began to butt heads a little bit with some of the other government bodies within the Imperium. There were fears that they were getting too powerful, had too much influence. It's the standard issue you come across. What's more important, your faith or making sure you get your taxes paid to ensure that the Imperium keeps running smoothly? It's kind of hard to do that when the church has taken all your money. This was uh, connected to the rise of several weak, what you might call the high ecclesiarchs. The high ecclesiarch is essentially the Pope of the Imperium, serving as one of the High Lords of Terror. And as we move into the end of the 35th, beginning of the 36th millennium, there had been a number of them who were notoriously weak and just not very good at the job. At the same time, the administratum was putting increasing pressure on the ecclesiarchy, hoping perhaps that they could crush them and subsume them into their own ranks. This ultimately culminated in the election of High Ecclesiarch Benedin IV, who, during his tenure, elected to move the entirety of the ecclesiarchal royal palace from Terra to Ophelia 7. Now, Benedict IV, he had once been the cardinal of Ophelia 7, and it was known for being one of the wealthiest planets in the Imperium. After maybe Mars and Terra itself, it was an entire planet of priests and multi-billionaires, and it was incredibly wealthy. As such, he delivered the entirety of the ecclesiastical council and all of their possessions to Ophelia 7, where where they began constructing an absolutely astoundingly massive palace. The damn thing was 90,000 square miles and stood 4,000 miles tall. To put that in some sort of perspective, that would mean covering almost the entirety of the United Kingdom in cathedrals, and these cathedrals are so tall that if laid down flat, they would stretch from Florida to Sweden. They are absolutely astronomically huge. Now, moving the entire imperial church and then building absolutely ginormous palaces began to drain the ecclesiarchy's treasury, and they were struggling to afford it. As such, they began raising the rate of their imperial tithes, demanding more and more money. This, of course, was not well liked by the locals, but the ecclesiarchy didn't care. They demanded their money, and on top of that, they had the forces to extract it, something known as the Fraternus Templars. Now, technically speaking, the ecclesiarchy was not actually allowed to have its own army, at least not permanently. However, they they controlled so many sacred sites scattered across all of imperial space that it was agreed that they had to be at least able to recruit soldiers when desperately needed. The administratum is notoriously slow and inefficient. It can take over 100 days for the administratum to even notice that a planet has disappeared, for instance. and as such, uh, the ability to raise emergency military forces became crucial to the ecclesiarchy's uh, existence, basically. And with such a force at their helm, they were basically able to extract as much taxation as they wanted, much to the chagrin of the administratum itself. And then, after 300 years, the entire ecclesiarchy, now comfortable that they had made their point, moved back to Terra under Ecclesiarch Gregor the 11th, where they re-established the ecclesiarchal palaces there, rebuilding them and once more increasing the amount of taxation they were extracting. This caused such an uproar amongst the general populace that even planetary governors began to speak out against this redirection of funds, only for many of these planetary governors to fall silent, as it were, usually at the end of a rifle barrel. It became increasingly clear that the only reason that many of the ecclesiarchs were even holding on to power at all was thanks to the administratum. They were secretly funneling funds to them in order to maintain their support, sort of undermine them from within, shall we say. At the same time, there was a massive outbreak of warp storms as chaos, orcs, and other horrors from beyond the unknown began infesting the Imperium. The the worship of the Emperor became increasingly difficult, and into this, what essentially became something of a religious power vacuum, there stepped a man called High Lord Gog Van Dyer. Now, Gog Van Dyer had been the High Lord of the Administratum. In fact, he was the 361st ruler of the Administratum, and had been known as a staunch opponent of the power of the ecclesiarchy. Uh, Through political machinations, he had also put himself effectively in charge of the Assassinorum, meaning that he essentially controlled two seats of the High Lord's table at the same time. And with the ecclesiarchy increasingly looking weak, having spent so much of their money and become so dependent on the administratum, he eventually made his move. In a calculated strike, he assassinated the incompetent High Ecclesiarch Paulus III and simultaneously installed himself as both the head of the Imperial Church and the head of the Administratum, meaning that this one man now controlled both the church, taxation, which also included the army, and also the entirety of the Assassin's Corps. This essentially put him as the single most powerful person in the Imperium. From there, he set about strengthening his position. He would visit various planets and ensure that they were both suitably faithful and that their taxes were being paid. And any world that he became displeased with, he was, well, let's just say he grew a bit more megalomaniacal as time went on. The hive world of Kalana 7, for instance, was bombarded from orbit for seemingly no known reason. It is never explained why he did this. On the agri world of Boris Minor, he ordered his both the Imperial Guard and the Fraternus Templars to enslave every female child under the age of 12 and have them deported off-world. I'm not going to speculate about that. And on the world of Jahana, for their crime of not giving him a big enough celebratory parade when he arrived, having arrived at the planet unannounced, I'd like to point out, he had the planet's ice caps vaporized from orbit, drowning 4 billion people. It was quickly becoming clear that Gog Van Dyer was an incredibly dangerous and incredibly unpleasant person, and one who sought to control the Imperium through an iron fist. And on top of that, he'd begun, shall we say, a process of promotion via dead men's shoes, where Imperial officers, if they wanted to rise up the ranks, simply had to shoot their commander. Yeah, things were getting a bit dicey. Van Dyer then set about looking for a way to further solidify his power, especially in the eyes of regular people. And to do that, it was reckoned he needed a miracle, a quite literal miracle in this case. Proof that he was in fact divinely ordained by the Emperor himself. And so he turned his eyes upon the world of San Lior. Via a network of spies and informants, he learned that the world of San Lior hosted a small and unusual cult known as the Daughters of the Emperor. This was an all-female cult of essentially warrior nuns who were steadfastly loyal to the Emperor. And it was felt that if he could somehow bring them on side, and in the process prove that he was divinely ordained, then his power would soon be unassailable. Travelling to San Lior with nothing but a small entourage, he met with the leader of the Daughters of the Emperor and told them exactly who he was, the High Ecclesiarch and the Emperor's chosen. The Daughters of the Emperor were none too impressed, however, and their leader actually fired upon Lord Van Dyer, only for the bolt from her las pistol to be dissipated in a shower of scintillating light. Lord Van Dyer proclaimed he had the Emperor's own divine protection, and because of that, he had the almighty right to rule. Suitably impressed, the cult of the Daughters of the Emperor swore themselves to being Van Dyer's personal bodyguards, a force that would later be renamed the Brides of the Emperor. They would serve him utterly and fully, devotedly, without question, and, well, you get the idea. The fact that they had been fully deceived, none of them ever having heard of personal force field technology, was never discussed. By now, Gog Van Dyer had almost full control of the Imperium, an unassailable bodyguard who served not only to protect him but also to keep him entertained, serving as both companions, servants, and courtesans and, shall we say, concubines, who were also so loyal that when there was an attempted coup within the ecclesiarchy, they wiped out every surviving cardinal. On top of that, he ruled the administratum. He was the head of the assassinorum. By this point, Gog van Dyer was the single most powerful man in imperial history. He controlled everything and was forever funneling funds into his own pet projects. He even had access to rejuvenate treatments, this being essentially the Imperium's version of life extension drugs. It's never really explained what it is, but essentially it scrubs your DNA clean and allows you to keep on living well past your normal life expectancy. Sometimes up to 400 or 500 years. Lord Van Dyer, by this point, had been alive for so long, even that wasn't properly working, and he was being kept alive on a cocktail of drugs, which basically kept his various organs from completely failing. Yet at the same time, the grand old palaces of the ecclesiarchy had been allowed to decay. On Terra, the ecclesiarchal palace was literally falling apart. Parts of it were falling down. The ancient chandeliers had been allowed to burn out. In places, dust had risen up to people's knees, and the ancient relics which it protected had fallen into despair or been sold off for their weight in gold. Into all this, Gog Van Dyer was increasingly showing symptoms of madness. He would, whenever the the dust and the grime was washed from the windows, he would retreat back into his bedchambers for days on end, locking himself away, where he was said to scream, suffering from horrific nightmares, that he feared life, and more importantly, he feared what came after it. And no amount of ministration by the brides of the Emperor could keep him satisfied at this point. This continued onward for some 70 years, with Lord Van Dyer becoming more and more crazed and lunatic as he went. However, that's not to say that there wasn't resistance against him. The Space Marines in particular, and not to mention the Cult Mechanicus, they were particularly resistant to Gog Van Dyer's attempts at forcing the ecclesiarchy on them, and so many people had flocked to systems and worlds controlled by them, seeking protection. And among these worlds was the planet of Dimamar, far off in the Segmentum Obscurus. Here, a young creature known as Sebastian Thor had risen and had begun to denounce Lord Gog Van Dyer. Now, it took months of debate before Van Dyer could decide what best to do about him, at which point he decided to dispatch a massive force of the Fraterus Templars to deal with him and his so-called Confederation of Light, a growing independence movement consisting of about 80 occupied planets. Heading out at once, the fleet was planned to destroy this small uprising, only for them to run into something utterly unexpected. A massive warp storm which blew in out of nowhere and utterly destroyed the Templar fleet. It soon became known as the Storm of the Emperor's Wrath, as it seemed to only affect ships that were attempting to defeat Thor's uprising. Now, the High Lords declared Thor a traitor and possibly even a man influenced by demonic power. However, Thor himself was able to prove that he was just a regular child born into the Schola Progenium, that is, the officially sanctioned imperial schooling system primarily used for the children or, well, either orphans or the children of imperial nobles. He had claimed that he had had visions of the Emperor ever since he was a child, and that he had been warned that humanity was failing, all because of the greed and corruption of the ecclesiarchy. Through his elegance and charisma, he was eventually able to turn the entirety of Segmentum Obscurus against the ecclesiarchy. The cardinal palaces were burned. Many of the ecclesiarchal lords were overthrown, and soon thousands began to travel together towards Holy Terror, simply to see what was going on. On top of that, the Space Marines and the Cult Mechanicus, they began to throw their weight behind Thor and his Confederation of Light, and together they began massing a massive force to launch an attack on Terror itself. Van Dyer, in response, entirely dissolved the High Lords of Terror and essentially launched a massive assault on the Confederation and its allies, hoping to wipe them out. However, he soon found himself under attack. The Gasteth Hederax, which is I genuinely don't know how to pronounce this. This is such a confusing word. The Fabricated General, head of the forces of Mars, accompanied by the Imperial Fists, Firehawks, Soul Drinkers, and Black Templars, led a massive assault on the ecclesiarchal palace, reminiscent almost of the Horus Heresy itself, except this time the other way round. Huge guns pounded the ecclesiarchal fortress, but now they were facing a force that could almost match the Space Marines. The Brides of the Emperor, now numbering close to 10,000, had been equipped with, while gear that wasn't quite as good as that of the Space Marines, they did now use power armor and bolt guns, weapons fully capable of defeating a Space Marine in battle, even if it was only at a rate of about two of the brides per Space Marine. It was then, however, that the final move was made. As Van Dyer's forces strove to hold back the Imperial strike force, the Custodes themselves got involved. They approached the leader of the Brides of the Emperor, and they guided her deep within the Imperial Palace. There they revealed the extent of Van Dyer's treachery, his corruption, his debased perversity, and it is rumoured that their leader was taken before the Emperor himself. It's not known what exactly she saw or what was said to her, only that when eventually she re-emerged, her once dark hair had been turned snowy white. Returning to the ecclesiarchal palace, she confronted Lord Van Dyer and gave one final speech. You have committed the ultimate heresy. Not only have you turned your back on the Emperor and stepped from his light, you have profaned his name, and you have almost destroyed everything he has striven to build. You have twisted and perverted the path which mankind had been set to tread. As your own decrees have stated, there can be no mercy for such treachery. I hereby renounce your lordship. You walk in the darkness and cannot be allowed to live. Your sentence is long overdue, and now it is your time to die. To which Gog Van Dyer responded with the only thing he could think of at the time: I don't have time to die. I'm too busy. Followed by a "Quack," as his head was cut from his shoulders. With that, the age of apostasy finally came to an end. The High Lords of Terror were reinstated. With now new guidelines and guardrails to ensure that no one High Lord could ever take so much power that they could control multiple branches of the Imperium all at the same time. Sebastian Thor was put on trial for heresy to see, well, if he had committed any great sin. Almost uniquely within the Imperium, he was actually found innocent and therefore was named the new High Ecclesiarch to rule from that point forward. To further prevent any event like this ever happening again, the ecclesiarchy was banned from actually having a military force of their own. They were no longer allowed to have men under arms. Although it should be noted that they would still need a defence force of their own to protect their various cathedrals and holy sites scattered throughout the planets. As such, all eyes turned towards the brides of the Emperor. Having fully renounced Gog Van Dyer's lordship, the brides were agreed that they would serve essentially as both the protectors of the ecclesiarchy and as the hunters of heretics within the Inquisition. Their job from this point forward would be to protect the Imperium from within, to hunt down those who would seek to corrupt and pervert the imperial way of life. No longer would they be the brides of the Emperor, but instead they would be what is probably my favourite faction in all of the Imperium, the Adeptus Sororitas, the Sisters of Battle. Take it away, ladies.
And they won't call me mother, sister, or wife. They will know me or not. By the strength of my life, I will burn with a light of my own. They'll know me as Joe. They won't call me mother, sister, or wife. They will know me or not. By the strength of my life, I will burn with a light of my own. They'll know me as Joe. No, they won't call me mother, sister, or wife. They will know me or not. By the strength of my life, I will burn with a light of my own. They'll know me as Joe. No, they won't call me mother, sister, or wife. They will know me or not. By the strength of my life, I will burn with a light of my own. They'll know me as Joe. They won't call me mother, sister, or wife. They will know me or not. By the strength of my life, I will burn with a light of my own. They'll know me as Joe. They'll know me